The train screeched to a halt, its whistle echoing across the dust-bitten plains. As the steam hissed and cleared, she stood alone, her suitcase cracked open, clothes scattered like broken dreams on the gravel. The letter of rejection fluttered. From her hand, its harsh words burned into her heart. Too timid, too plain, return to sender. The townfolk didn't even look twice. Just another mail-order bride sent back like spoiled goods. But he saw her. From the edge of the platform, half hidden beneath a worn Stetson, the quiet cowboy watched. He saw past the tremble in her fingers, past the silence in her throat. He saw the way she stood, still, fragile, but unyielding, like a daisy fighting through stone. And days from now, when the fire takes the barn, when she risks everything to save the man who once saved her, she'll still be silent. But her love will roar. So remember this moment, because no one else did. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. Would you like me to continue with the beginning of the story from here? The town of Willow Creek wasn't much more than a scattering of buildings hunched together against the wind. Dust ruled here. It coated the windows, the boots, even the hearts of the people who lived within its creaky bones. A single main street, stretched from the sagging train depot to the crooked steeple of the town's only church. Everything in between was stitched with rumors and the kind of loneliness that could hollow a person out from the inside. And in the middle of it all, walked Clara. Or rather, drifted. Quiet as smoke, almost as if she feared taking up too much space. The long skirts she wore dragged in the dust, and her bonnet tilted low enough to shield her face from prying eyes. But not the whispers. They said she wasn't right. Some said it was the long scar that traced the curve of her jaw, disappearing, beneath the high collar she always wore. Others claimed she had the devil's luck, widowed once already, at an age when most girls were still learning to dance. Some swore she was deaf, or mute, or both, because she never answered when spoken to. No one knew the real story. No one cared to. She had arrived months ago on another train, clutching a letter of promise. A future bought and paid for, tucked inside a brown leather case. A man, a home, a new beginning. That was the dream for women like Clara. Silent girls from nowhere, places who had no family to speak for them. No dowry, no voice. The dream, like so many in Willow Creek, cracked and splintered on impact. Her husband-to-be took one look at her silence, her timid eyes, the way her hands fidgeted with her skirt, and called off the match. Too weak, he said. Too strange. What man needed a wife who flinched like a skittish colt and didn't laugh at a man's jokes? The townsfolk nodded and agreed. Better to leave such a girl to her own devices. Better to keep your distance. And so Clara stayed, unwanted, unseen, earning pennies sweeping floors at the general store and sleeping in a drafty back room where the wind whistled louder than any conversation she ever had. Every morning she sat by the cracked window and stitched, not because there was anyone to mend for, but because the quiet was less cruel when her hands were busy. Every evening she took the long way home, avoiding the saloon's swinging doors and the groups of women at the well, their laughter cutting sharper than broken glass. She didn't cry anymore. Crying had been squeezed out of her a long time ago, back when she'd learned that tears only made you softer. And softness was a kind of death out here. If she ached in silence. If she dreamed, it was only to remember the way the river smelled after rain, back in a place too far away to return to. If she prayed only for a kind face. Just one. The scar along her jaw pulled tight whenever she smiled. Not that. She had much cause to anymore. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe. I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. Because the truth was, in Willow Creek, Clara was less a person and more a shadow people stepped around. They didn't mean to be cruel, most of them. They simply didn't see her. Or if they did, it was with wary glances, like she carried something catching. The world outside Willow Creek had taught her to expect nothing, And Willow Creek delivered. Exactly that. No birthday cakes or friendly waves. No invitations to barn dances or church socials. No warm bread from a neighbor's oven. Only silence. Not the comforting kind, but the cold, hollow kind that made you feel like you could scream at the top of your lungs and no one would so much as blink. The only company she had was the ragged gray cat who lurked around the alleys behind the store. Even he didn't trust her fully, only allowing brief touches before darting away. Sometimes, when the sunset stretched bloody and low across the sky, Clara wondered if she was even real anymore, or if she had somehow become part of the dust, a forgotten ghost in a forgotten town. Still, every morning she stitched. Still, every evening she walked. One day blurred into the next, each one swallowing her a little more. Until the day a letter came, folded tight and clutched by Mr. Bailey, the store owner who spoke to her only when necessary. "Here," he said gruffly, shoving the envelope at her like it burned his hands. "See for you." Clara blinked down at it. She wasn't sure what shocked her more, that someone had written to her, or that Mr. Bailey had said more than 2 words, in her direction. The letter was from another rancher, a different man, a different promise. Hope prickled, painful and bright behind her ribs. Maybe this time, she thought, maybe this time someone would see past the scar, the silence, the things she couldn't say out loud. She pressed the letter to her chest that night and dared to dream again. It was a small dream, a cabin of her own, a garden, the heavy, simple warmth of belonging. Not love, not laughter, not grand gestures. She didn't expect those anymore. Just a place where she wouldn't be an empty space. People tried not to notice. A place where her quietness wouldn't be a burden. She didn't know that fate was already stitching a different future for her, rougher, harder, but also sweeter than anything she had dared imagine. And it would all begin with a train whistle, a broken suitcase, and a cowboy who watched from the shadows. The days after the letter came moved slower than molasses. Clara packed her few things, carefully, folding each item as if handling fine china. The suitcase was old and brittle, much like the dreams tucked inside it. The train was due in on a Saturday afternoon. Willow Creek's platform buzzed with the usual sleepy excitement. A new shipment of supplies, a few travelers, maybe a drifter or 2. Everyone watched the tracks like something important was about to happen. But when Clara stepped down from the platform, her suitcase slipping from her hands and spilling her life across the dirt, the only thing important was how quickly they looked away, except for him. He leaned against a weather-worn post, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face. A dusty duster coat clung to his tall frame, and worn boots dug into the wood beneath him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't smirking. He just watched, his gaze steady, not cruel. Clara's cheeks burned as she gathered her things, hands trembling. The rejection letter crumpled in her grip. Her would-be groom hadn't even come in person, just a short, cutting message left at the depot. Return to sender. The words rang in her head as she shoved the last of her clothes into her case and snapped. It shut with a trembling finality. The stranger didn't move to help, but he didn't look away either. There was something unsettling about being seen so clearly after so many months of invisibility. She turned and hurried away from the platform, her heart hammering, suitcase thumping against her knee. The townsfolk barely noticed her passing, except for the whispers that bloomed like weeds in her wake. Another reject. Poor thing. Don't know why they keep sending them out here. She's bad luck, that one. The words wrapped around her throat tighter than any hands ever could. She ducked her head and kept walking. But before she disappeared down the dusty street, she glanced back. The stranger still watched her, and for just a heartbeat, Clara thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked a lot like understanding. The days crawled by. Clara returned to her small room behind the general store, working until her fingers were raw, her eyes dry. She told herself she imagined the man at the depot, imagined the way his gaze had steadied her for half a second before the world slipped away again, but she saw him again, 2 days later. He was tying up his horse outside the blacksmith's when their eyes met across the street. No words, just a nod, slow and deliberate, like a man tipping his hat to a fellow traveler. Clara stiffened, unsure what to do. No one ever nodded at her. No one treated her like she deserved the courtesy of acknowledgement. Before she could react, a shout broke the moment. "Hey, watch yourself, sweetheart." It was Amos Granger, a wiry, mean-eyed ranch hand known for drinking more than working. He staggered out of the saloon, pointing a wobbly finger at her. "You're bad luck, you know that? Should have been on the next train out of here." Several others laughed, sharp, pitiless sounds that made Clara flinch. She lowered her head, willing herself to disappear. But before Amos could take another stumbling step toward her, boots crossed the street with slow, heavy purpose. The stranger. He placed himself between Clara and Amos without a word. Didn't raise his fists, didn't raise his voice. Just stood there, a silent wall of dust and leather and steel. Amos hesitated. Drunk smelled danger better than most. He muttered something under his breath and slunk back toward the saloon. The stranger turned to Clara then, and for the first time spoke. "You all right?" The words were simple, rough around the edges like river stones, but they carried a weight that made Clara's throat tighten. She nodded stiffly. He studied her a moment longer, then tipped his hat. "Name's Eli," he said. "Eli Turner." She opened her mouth. No sound came out. Heat flooded her cheeks. She cursed herself silently. Of course she would choke when someone finally talked to her like a real person. But Eli didn't seem to mind. He nodded again, accepting the silence as if it was as natural as breathing. "See you around, miss," he said, voice low and sure. And then he was gone, blending back into the town like he'd never been there. Clara stood rooted to the spot, the words she couldn't say tumbling uselessly inside her. She didn't realize until much later that her hands had stopped trembling. In the days that followed, they crossed paths often, sometimes at the well, sometimes near the smithy, sometimes on the street where the dust hung so thick it painted everything in muted gold. Eli never pushed conversation. Sometimes he only nodded, a faint ghost of a smile in his weathered face. Other times he offered small things, a piece of dried apple, a story about his horse, a rough observation about the weather. Clara listened. Sometimes she answered, a nod, a smile tugging shyly at her scarred mouth. Once she even whispered a thank you, so soft the wind nearly stole it away. But he heard it. He always heard the things no one else noticed. And slowly, like spring creeping into a long winter, something began to shift inside her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not to him. But the town didn't miss the change. People whispered more now, their eyes darting between her and the cowboy who dared to tip his hat to the outcast girl. She'll bring him nothing but trouble. Maybe he's just soft in the head. She'll ruin him, same as she ruined her last man. Danger didn't just loom. It coiled, patient and poisonous, waiting for its moment. And somewhere deep down, Clara knew, whatever this fragile thing blooming between her and Eli was, it wouldn't survive unless one of them was brave enough to fight for it. Winter fell fast in Willow Creek. The dust turned to frozen mud, the sky hung low and gray, and the wind developed teeth. Most folks stayed close to their stoves and kept their heads down. But the chill that wrapped around Clara had nothing to do with the season. It began with a letter, another one. This time, not from a man looking for a bride, but from the man who'd rejected her. The letter had been nailed to the post outside the general store, not folded, not sealed, pinned in full view. Clara wasn't supposed to see it, but she did. Let this be a warning to all. Some women bring death with them. She's cursed. My brother died less than a month after wedding her. Don't make my mistake. There was no name signed at the bottom, but everyone knew who wrote it, and everyone knew who it was about. The words spread like wildfire. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Most turned colder than the frost forming on the church windows. Whispers became stares. The air grew thicker with judgment. That morning, Mrs. Cartwright refused to let Clara refill the flower bins, claimed she didn't want that kind of energy near the food. That afternoon, a boy tossed a stone at her feet and called her a witch. That evening, Mr. Bailey left a note on her workbench. Rooms needed for real help come spring. Be gone by February. Just like that. No home, no job, no future. Again. She tried to walk back to her room with her head high, but she only made it as far as the alley behind the store before her knees gave out. The snow had begun to fall then. Light, almost beautiful. But it stung her skin like tiny needles. She sat there until night swallowed the town, trembling under her threadbare shawl. She didn't cry. Not at first. Then, when the cold reached her bones, she did cry. Quiet, hopeless sobs that soaked into her sleeves and made her feel like a child left in the woods. She thought of running. Anywhere. Somewhere where her name didn't carry shadows. Somewhere where people didn't flinch at her silence. She thought of walking into the snow and not turning back, but her body was too tired. Her legs wouldn't move. The world had emptied her, piece by piece. Kindness had been too rare. Love, a distant myth. She pulled her shawl tighter and pressed her head to her knees, preparing to disappear. She didn't hear him at first. The crunch of boots in snow, the warm breath of a horse, the creak of leather. Clara. His voice didn't shout. It didn't panic. It folded around her like a blanket. Firm, gentle. Clara, look at me. She raised her head, just enough to see Eli crouching beside her. His gloves were worn, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes filled with something deeper than pity. He didn't ask why she was there, didn't ask what happened. He just held out a hand. She stared at it, her fingers twitched, and then, slowly, with a trembling breath, she placed hers in his. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her when she nearly fell. His arms circled around her, not possessively, protectively, not saving her, anchoring her. "I've got you," he murmured. She believed him. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she believed someone. He didn't take her back to the store. He took her to his place, a modest cabin tucked a half-mile past the edge of town. Firelight flickered behind the frosted windows. The smell of wood smoke and dried herbs greeted her as he opened the door. Inside was warmth, not just heat, warmth. Blankets draped across worn furniture, a kettle on the stove. A dog curled by the hearth who lifted his head but didn't bark, just thumped his tail, slow and calm. Eli didn't fuss over her. He didn't pelt her with questions or platitudes. He handed her a blanket, poured her tea, sat across from her in quiet. It was the kind of silence she understood, the kind that said, "I'm not leaving." After some time, she finally spoke. "They think I killed him," she whispered, voice hoarse. Eli looked up from the fire. "You didn't." She blinked. "You don't even know the story." "I don't need to." And just like that, something cracked. She told him everything, not in a flood, but in small, broken pieces. Her first husband, a sick man who died young. The town that turned against her, the letters, the loneliness. Eli listened. No interruptions, no disbelief, just presence. And when her voice gave out, he said softly, "You ever want to leave this town? I'll ride beside you. No questions, no judgments. But if you stay, you won't be alone." She stared at him for a long time. Scar, catching the light as her lips parted. "Why?" she asked. He shrugged, a quiet smile tugging at his mouth. "Because I see you." Her throat tightened. "And what do you see?" she asked, barely a breath. He leaned forward, voice low but steady. "I see strength you don't even know you carry. I see a woman who's been burned and still walks through fire. I see gold where others only saw ash." The words undid her. She cried again, but this time, not from despair, from relief, from the terrifying, beautiful realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't unlovable. He didn't touch her again that night. He didn't try to kiss her or make promises he couldn't keep. He simply placed another log on the fire, sat down nearby, and stayed. No fanfare. No rescue. Just quiet, real care. The kind that builds trust one heartbeat at a time. They thought She was broken. But someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you. Tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here. Winter lingered like a ghost, its icy grip holding fast to the town of Willow Creek. But inside the small cabin, at the edge of the woods, warmth had returned. Not just from the fire crackling in the hearth or the thick stew simmering on the stove. It was something deeper, a slow-burning peace, fanned by care, patience, and a shared silence that no longer hurt. Clara had been staying with Eli for nearly a month now. She never said it aloud, but her shoulders had begun to relax. Her eyes no longer darted every time someone passed the window. And for the first time in years, her body didn't flinch when someone stood too close. Eli noticed it all. He didn't mention it. He didn't need to. They'd built an unspoken rhythm between them, chores shared without prompting, small smiles, exchanged like secrets, and long nights spent near the fire, telling stories in a language that barely needed words. One morning, Clara reached for the axe, leaning against the chopping stump before Eli could. "You don't have to," he began. She gave him a look, soft but firm. "I want to." He nodded. "All right." That afternoon, they rebuilt the broken fence near the western field. A few days later, she repainted the faded trim on his cabin windows while he reinforced the barn roof. Bit by bit, they were claiming space, not just in the world, but in each other's lives. The town noticed. It didn't like what it saw. One afternoon, while Clara was in the market trading for eggs, Sheriff Lane paid Eli a visit. He rode in with 2 deputies, dust on his boots and trouble in his mouth. "You got her out here, Eli?" he asked, as if Clara were a stray animal. Eli didn't answer. The sheriff stepped off his horse, adjusted his belt. "Folks are saying you're defending her, even sheltering her. That wise?" Eli shrugged. Didn't realize decency needed permission. "She's poison," the sheriff said, voice sharp. "Men die around her. Town turns cold. That's no coincidence." Eli met the man's eyes. Neither is fear pretending it's righteousness. There was a long pause. One of the deputies shifted in the saddle, uneasy. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "You're walking a line, cowboy. Be careful not to fall off it." Then he turned and mounted up, riding back toward town like a wolf who didn't get the kill he wanted. Eli watched until they disappeared behind the trees. He didn't tell Clara that night, but she saw it in his jaw, the way it clenched when he thought she wasn't looking. Something had shifted, not just between them, but around them, and it was coming. The next morning, a note appeared at their gate. "Leave by Sunday. Or burn. With her." No name, just those words, and a nail driven deep into the wood. Clara's hands trembled as she read it. "I should go," she whispered, "before they come for you too." But Eli didn't flinch. "You're not a burden." She looked up, tears pressing hot behind her eyes. "I'm not worth your peace." He took her hand gently, pressing it to his chest. "You gave me back more than peace. You gave me something to stay for." She shook her head. "They'll never stop." "Then we don't run," he said. "We root." And just like that, the decision was made. They'd build, and they'd fight, together. The next 2 weeks were a blur of work and quiet defiance. Eli traded his savings for lumber and nails. Clara gathered fabric scraps and spun them into curtains and seat cushions. They cleared the backfield for a horse corral, built a chicken coop, planted hardy seeds that could survive a cold snap. Neighbors who once turned away began to pause at the edge of the property, not close but watching. Curiosity maybe envy. One woman, Mrs. Rowley, left a jar of preserved peaches on their porch. No note. Just the fruit sweet and stubborn. It was a start. But the past doesn't vanish just because you plant something new. And one night, it came roaring back. Eli was gone, riding to the edge of town to pick up a tool shipment. Clara stayed behind, to finish sewing a saddle blanket. That's when they came. 3 men, faces wrapped in scarves, voices thick with liquor and menace. "You think you can curse this place and start fresh?" One of them growled, grabbing her by the arm. She fought, harder than they expected. A broken lamp, a shattered window. She managed to get free, ran into the woods barefoot, blood streaking from her hand where glass had sliced her. They chased her for nearly half a mile, but the forest turned dark fast and they spooked. Clara collapsed near, a frozen creek, shivering, gasping, not just from fear but from fury. Why was it always her who had to run? Why was survival the only story written for her? She didn't hear Eli approach, didn't know how he'd found her. But when his coat wrapped around her shoulders and his arms pulled her to his chest, she didn't collapse. She rose, not alone, not anymore. They returned to the cabin that night and didn't sleep. Instead, they sat by the hearth, bruised, bloodied, and burning. Clara spoke first. "They'll never let me belong." Eli took her hand, tracing the edge of her palm where the skin split. "Then we won't belong to them." She met his gaze. A long silence passed between them. Then she said the words she'd never dared. "I'm not scared to stay. I'm scared to love." His answer was a whisper. "I already do." The fire crackled between them, small and bright, and, in that quiet moment, they built something stronger than any wall or roof. They built promise. Subscribe. I want you to meet someone else tomorrow, someone just as forgotten. The town gathered at the churchyard the next Sunday, not for a sermon, not for a wedding, for a reckoning. Word had spread fast about the break-in at Eli's cabin, the blood on the floor, the threats nailed to the fence. Some claimed Clara had brought the violence herself. Others, newer voices, murmured that maybe, just maybe, the town had created the storm it feared. Sheriff Lane stood at the front, boots planted wide, arms crossed, waiting. The crowd parted. When Eli rode in, his hat low, Clara sitting steady behind him, hands clenched in his coat. They didn't speak as they dismounted, didn't flinch under the glares and whispers. Eli stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the faces that had judged, condemned, and abandoned without a second thought. He could have shouted. He could have threatened. Instead, he spoke simply, voice steady as stone. "I'm not here to beg for your blessing," he said, "or to clear her name. She doesn't need your permission. She's already earned something far greater." A long breath, my loyalty, a few gasps, a few sneers, but most stayed silent, uneasy, listening. Eli turned, held out his hand to Clara, and in front of the town that had tried to crush her, she stepped forward, chin high, scar visible in the morning sun, and placed her hand in his. Not trembling, not apologizing, choosing. Eli squeezed her fingers once, firm and sure. "Wherever you are," he said, voice rough with feeling, "that's where home is for me." It wasn't a grand speech. It was something rarer, a public vow without a ring or a preacher, just a man offering his heart without shame. And for Clara, it was enough. More than enough. They didn't stay to hear the mutters or the arguments that followed. They rode out past the town limits, past the frozen river and the old mill, where the snow lay unbroken and the world felt wide again. No one followed. No one dared. They rode until sunset bled across the sky in bruised purples and golds. And when Eli pulled the horses to a stop at the ridge overlooking the valley, the place they had talked about building new fences, new barns, a new life, Clara slid down first, her boots crunching into fresh snow. Eli dismounted beside her, silent. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke from distant farms. Above them, the first stars blinked to life, cautious, then bolder, until the entire sky blazed with them. Clara turned to him, heart hammering against ribs still bruised from fear and hope alike. She didn't need to ask what came next. He didn't need to promise anything more. Together, they built a small fire. No church, no music, no town square parade. Just flame and sky, and two battered souls who had chosen each other when no one else had. Later, they laid together under a rough wool blanket, watching their fire crackle. Low, Eli brushed a strand of hair from Clara's face. "You're not cursed," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a real smile, small and breaking across her face like spring after a brutal winter. "I know," she whispered back. Not because someone had told her, because she had lived it, because she had survived every blow meant to shatter her and still dared to reach for more, because she had found someone who saw her not as a burden, but as a blessing. Years later, long after Willow Creek became a name they barely spoke anymore, Clara would plant a garden behind the home they built with their own hands. Wildflowers, tough enough to survive the coldest nights. And in that garden, they buried a simple stone. No name, no dates, just one word: hope. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.